The offseason is in full swing. We've got option decisions. We've got qualifying offer news. We've got coaching staff updates. All that and more on the first full offseason edition of the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Jack Stern joined by Spencer Michaelis. We're back on our offseason schedule, which means that you haven't heard from us for a couple of weeks. We're usually switching to an every other week format because it gives us more to talk about because this news has kind of piled up a little bit over the last week and a half here. But quite a couple headlines kind of breaking earlier this week, too. So good timing for everybody. This was kind of how we tried to schedule it out anyway, knowing when some of these dates are going to be coming up. But before we jump into that, I always have to ask Spencer how he's doing. So he said he just got his Ethernet plugged in. So hopefully he doesn't drop out on us as we're in the middle of this. Hopefully that means everything is going well.
Yeah, you always sound so thrilled to ask how my day is going, Jack. I really appreciate the sincerity behind you asking me. But yeah, I'm doing great. Yeah, like you said, in full off-season mode for baseball. Although, we've got the AFL, we've got Venezuelan Winter League going on, we've got Dominican Winter League, and I have been watching some of those games. And I'm also in full-blown draft like preparation already for the MLB draft, which is earlier than I've ever been. So hopefully that means I'm going to try and get a little more content out draft wise this year. So we'll see if I actually follow through on that or not, but I'm saying it out loud. So now I'm going to have a little bit more pressure to do it. But yeah, otherwise everything has been great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. If anyone's watching on video, I don't know if they can see it or not, if it makes a difference, but I got new lights installed in my home office. So I'm not like sitting in the dark in my corner here where my desk is. So like if you're watching on video, maybe the lighting behind me looks a little bit more balanced. I don't know, but I'm happy about that. So it's a little bit easier to work, especially because we're in off-season mode now. So I'm doing a lot of working from home, at least when it comes to this job. So that's good. But otherwise, it's kind of been nice to just take a little bit of a breather here. And now that we've got some news rolling in too, it's kind of been a nice balance here this week of not having to go to the ballpark, but also having some stuff to cover and some stuff to write about. And we can start talking about some of that stuff now. We'll open up with some option decisions. So the deadline for those came and went. So mutual options, club options, player options, all of that stuff. And there were a few decisions that we have to run through here. We'll start with Rhys Hoskins and Danny Jansen, who both had mutual options for 2026. They were declined by the club, so the Brewers turned those down. As a reminder, mutual options are basically never exercised. More often than not, they're kind of thrown into contracts as a way to offset money to next year's payroll. Although the next guy we're going to talk about here, that actually wasn't the case for him. Brandon Woodruff declined his half of his mutual option as well, also making him a free agent. But we got a little bit more news to get to on him as we move along here. Jose Quintana had a club option. The Brewers declined that for 2026, so he is now a free agent. Freddie Peralta, unsurprisingly, had his very team-friendly club option picked up for 2026. That'll be the last year on his contract. It's that extension that he signed several years ago, finally coming to the end of that. He's going to continue to be the subject of trade speculation, so probably not the last time that we're going to be talking about whether that contract is carried out while a member of the Brewers or if somebody else scoops that up in exchange for a package of controllable talent that they send back to Milwaukee. The big decision here, though, is William Contreras, the Brewers declining his club option. And this, if you kind of pay attention to the financial workings of the game, this should not have come as a surprise to anybody. But arbitration and all this stuff is always tricky. I get it. So we are already even earlier than usual in our mode or the point of the off season where we get to explain how arbitration works again for people who might be a little bit confused. So William Contreras had a club option for 2026. The club option was for $12 million. And if the Brewers were to turn it down, which they did, it's a $100,000 buyout instead. But that does not mean that Contreras is a free agent. He is still with the team. It doesn't negate the 2 more years of club control that the Brewers have over him. But by declining that option, instead of bringing him back on that contract for next year, his contract for 2026 will instead be decided by the arbitration process. Either they're going to go to a hearing or they could come to a new agreement before going to a hearing and or exchanging figures and all of that stuff. But his projection from MLB trade rumors in arbitration is $11.1 million. So basically right now you're looking at $800,000 in savings roughly at this moment based on this decision that the Brewers are making. But as we talk about all the time in arbitration, it's very much a ripple effect kind of thing where teams generally are not going to want to pay more than they have to now, because that means that down the line, those players can't point to a bigger raise that they could have gotten in their last run through arbitration and then get a bigger raise off of that. Everything builds off of the last situation, off of the last case. That's how arbitration works. So basically, it's a $900,000 difference, but that compounds each time that he runs through the process, and it has an impact on the next guy, like William Contreras, who runs through this process as a catcher, whether it's for the Brewers, whether it's for somebody else. Arbitration cases, the amount that players file for, the amount that teams file for, the amount that they are awarded by an arbiter if it goes to a hearing, all of this stuff is often determined on precedent. Both sides are going to make their argument based on precedent because they're going to try to compare the player to a past case. And that's really how this works. You know, we've talked about the system before. Is it a great system? No, but this is how it works. And both sides are going to play according to the game that is set up here. Now, another thing that I feel like we really need to emphasize, and I tried to emphasize this on Twitter after the news broke, was this is not the Brewers pulling the rug out from underneath William Contreras. This is not reporter Jack, just like speculative common sense thinking here. I'm sure everybody knew this was coming. So let's back up the train a little bit to when the Brewers and Contreras were kind of in this situation last year, going through his first season of arbitration. They filed figures. They were going to go to a hearing. Instead, they came to an agreement before they ended up going to a hearing, and that's the agreement that he was on for 2025. So if you remember, it was a 1-year deal and then that club option for 2026. Now, neither of us are really expecting them to come to an agreement based on the nature of the case. Contreras was filing for, or did file for, what would have been the highest salary for a first-year arbitration catcher since Buster Posey in 2013. He filed for $6.5 million. That's how much he wanted to make, or I should say how much his representation and his camp wanted him to make, and felt that they could make an argument that he should make in 2025. And again, that would have been the highest salary for a catcher in his first year of arbitration since Buster Posey, like 12 years ago. The Brewers, meanwhile, filed for 5.6, which was exactly what Cal Raleigh ended up getting from the Mariners going into last year in arbitration. So again, it's kind of based on that precedent game. The Brewers basically not wanting to go up over that bar that was set by Cal Raleigh just hours before they had to exchange figures. What happened here was, and what surprised us then was, we were surprised that the Brewers ended up going over that. The agreement that they ended up reaching with Contreras, he made $6.1 million in 2025, which did give him that second place arbitration salary, the highest since Posey in 2013. And we were both surprised by that. But now that you can kind of see how it's played out, now it's really easy to see why they did that, because this is the trade-off now. The Brewers conceded quite a bit in Contreras' direction for 2025 by agreeing to give him $6.1 million. The flip side of that, though, is that now this is the part of that deal where it swings back toward I'm going to put the team's favor in air quotes, because $6.1 million for a catcher as good as William Contreras is also in the team's favor. But relatively speaking, this is even more team friendly now, according to the way the arbitration process works. The trade-off of that deal and the half of that deal that was good for the Brewers and not as good for Contreras was, by putting that club option in there, it basically gave them a mechanism by which they could not pay him as much as they had to in 2026, or as they otherwise would have had to in 2026. So that club option for 2026 again was for 12 million. Basically, the way this was going to work was either Contreras was going to have an amazing season, and if he had an amazing season, like a career year, then his projection would have been well above 12 million. Then the Brewers get to exercise that option, and they're spending way less than they otherwise would have on Contreras. If he doesn't have a superstar season, which is what happened, his projection comes in under 12 million, and then the Brewers can decline that option. It's a mechanism that was always in there for the Brewers to basically keep that arbitration salary from inflating any more than they absolutely have to allow it to. And that was kind of the give and take of that agreement. This is a deal that Contreras and his camp negotiated with the Brewers. Contreras signed it. Nobody should be surprised by this. I highly doubt Contreras feels like he's been slapped in the face or that the rug's been pulled out from underneath him. This is not the same thing as Corbin Burns or Josh Hader or any of that stuff, because those guys never signed deals like this. Everybody knew that this is where this was going. Now, we don't know if they're going to come to an agreement. Maybe they will again. If they don't and it goes to a hearing, yes, things can still get messy. We've seen that happen before. And if it does get to that point, I think both of us, our advice to William would be, don't go to the hearing, because good things never happen from that. Both sides are saying things that they don't really believe or they don't really mean. They're just trying to make their case on the business side of baseball. But for now, this specific move, this should not really be upsetting anybody. This is the way that this works. Both sides almost certainly knew that this is where this was going. Like I said, Contreras got things a little bit more in his favor for 25. Now this is the part of the deal where it kind of swings back toward the Brewers, and they can kind of take advantage of that, so to speak. Nothing surprising here, but that is the long and detailed explanation of why this happened, what this means for right now, and why nobody should really be panicking about what's happened so far here with this decision.
Yeah, we talked about it when they came to terms and agreed on it. Like you said, we were surprised that they did. And we said, like, it's going to take probably a borderline MVP type of season for sure, like an all-star starter type of season from him, where it's consistent production all year long. And frankly, it's funny that Raleigh was the guy we compared it to, because Raleigh had the season that it probably would have taken. It could have been done in a different way. It didn't need to be that many home runs from Contreras. It could have been done in a different, but the overall level of production is what they were kind of hedging against with the team option. They were saying if he has an insane breakout, which we've both said a number of times has always been in there for him, William Contreras is capable of having that breakout. Is it super likely, especially the further he gets into his career? No, but it was always there and it was always a possibility. So this gave them the opportunity to kind of hedge against that. If he had that season and instead it might have, arbitration estimate might have gone up to 13, 14 million, and then they accept the club option and save their money there. And in this case, they, along with the projections, don't believe he's going to get 12 million. So they decline the option. Extra 100,000 goes to Contreras in the buyout. And then we go to the hearing, or we go to this new negotiation and see what happens. Not to burst any bubbles, I really, really doubt that these negotiations end in an actual extension of any kind. It might be similar to what we saw last offseason, where they give a little to get another club option to hedge against it again. I could see that same type of thing happening this year, but I would not expect a long-term deal to get done with Contreras. And that's, you can jump in if you want, Jack, but I think we both agree that's probably the correct choice on the Brewers' part to not pay a catcher deep into his 30s. If William Contreras is willing to go and take a 4-year extension of some sort, then they might consider that. They might be able to come to terms with that. I don't know why he would do that. And I think that's the only way the Brewers would consider it, if it only buys out a couple years of free agency, only takes him a couple years into his 30s. Anything beyond that, I don't think the Brewers would do it. I think we've already seen with William's brother what can go wrong with that type of deal. And it's happened a lot over the years with catchers. They don't age super well. It's a tough position. A guy like Contreras, who plays every single day, odds are it's just not going to age super well. And even if he's a good hitter and ends up at first, the money probably won't be worth it at that point. So I wouldn't expect that. But I don't think this is a big deal. I don't think this is going to end in any sort of ill will from Contreras towards the Brewers, from the Brewers towards Contreras. I think it's going to be just like any other offseason. And I do think there's a different personality here than with the two that Jack mentioned. Like, I think there's a little bit of a different personality, and I won't go beyond that, but like, I don't think the same thing would happen even if they do go to a hearing that happened with the other two. So I'm not very concerned about it. I don't think fans should be. I don't think William Contreras is upset, like you said. I don't think this is really a big deal at all, but um, we knew it was going to be something that got people a little upset when it happened. We were both anticipating it, and I did find it very funny that the Brewers included in parentheses remains under team control under the graphic that pointed out that they had declined William Contreras' option because they were trying to get out ahead of people freaking out that he was completely gone.
Really good
And like,
foresight by Brewers socials. Great job on that one. I'm serious. Not even joking. Great foresight. That was
I know
very, very good to include that. It probably didn't fan a ton of flames, but it fanned some.
it did for sure. And yeah, I mean, I don't think it's something we need to spend much more time on, but we'll talk about it again when they either do come to terms or they end up going to a hearing or whatever. But I think the main point here is this is not something to be upset about or concerned about. This is just baseball business, like Jack said. This is kind of how it goes. This is how it goes for every team, every organization. Nobody is going to just willingly give in to players' demands during the arbitration process. That's just not how it works. And we talked about that last year. We're not going to rehash all of it, but that is the way baseball goes from the player side and the team side. Neither side wants to budge. And that's how it goes in arbitration. And it's going to keep going that way until something changes with the process. And I don't know that it ever will, because like Jack said, it might not be the best process, but they haven't found anything better that both sides can agree on. So right now, this is the way it goes. And I don't know that they ever will find something that both sides are totally on board with that changes this.
You're absolutely right about all the stuff you said about an extension too. Contreras is not the guy you extend. You don't extend a catcher. You talked about his brother. He still hits fine, but he had to move out from behind the plate. Now, I think William's a better defender, a much better defender than his brother ever was, and I still say that as someone who maybe gets a little picky with criticizing the framing once in a while because it's not always super consistent, even though it's still way better than it used to be. Criticize the game calling a lot. Like, he's still a lot better behind the plate than his brother ever was at his best.
Agreed.
But let's think of some other guys too. Like, remember how quickly Jonathan Lucroy hit a wall after he left Milwaukee? How quickly Yasmani Grandal hit a wall after he left Milwaukee? Like, those are two
Joe
guys
Mauer
that
is always one that comes to mind for me.
Yes,
Joe Mauer was just snap of a finger and it was completely done.
Yep. And that's what can happen with catchers. And then you add in the fact that Pat Murphy and the staff have basically decided that they're okay with like Contreras grinding his body to a pulp behind the plate by catching almost every day, even with a broken finger. And like that, William wants to do that, but also the people in charge of him are also letting him do that too. So, that's part of the equation here as well. But he also has all the makings then, given this workload right now, of a guy who probably could hit a wall very, very quickly once he gets to 30 or a couple years past 30. Like, I would not be shocked if the aging curve is very, very unfriendly to him. Even by the time he's like 31 or 32 already, you might be looking at a guy who's a lot closer now to backup catcher territory than a guy who's a bona fide starter. So this is how the Brewers generally play it with their guys, and it's a big reason why they're competitive every year. They time this out well. They bring them in for what they know are going to be their best seasons, and then they don't really bother a whole lot with an extension that's going to take them past their primes. If they do extensions, it's usually with guys like Freddie Peralta or Aaron Ashby, who have a pretty good chance of turning into something, and you kind of scoop them up on that deal. And even then, by doing that early enough, those guys are probably still going to be free agents by the time that they're right around that 30, 31, 32. With the way that you time those contracts out, you're buying out all the ARB years, then you're adding on like 2-3 years on top of that. Same thing with Jackson Chourio, position player. They signed him right away before he debuted. And that contract can be up to 10 seasons, but debuting at 20 years old, that takes him through age 30 for what are probably going to be his best seasons. that's kind of what they're going to do here. And I think they're going to play this the right way with William Contreras. It's not going to be the popular way with the fan base, but it is going to be the right way. I feel pretty confident about that. One more note on Contreras as well. I mentioned catching with the broken finger. He did get surgery on that. Adam McCalvy reporting that a few days ago. It's about 5 to 6 weeks of downtime, but he should be fine by the time the Brewers get back for spring training. Shouldn't really be any restrictions there that we know of yet. So he did get something to correct that issue, and then we'll kind of see how things look for him next year too, if he's going to be able to play with better health. I mentioned we would circle back to Brandon Woodruff because the Brewers offered him a qualifying offer. So this is going to be the question after Woodruff predictably turned down his half of his mutual option. So this is an interesting one too, because we just talked about like the Brewers, they don't want to commit money to guys who are usually on the wrong end of 30, all this kind of stuff, injury concerns, whatever. The qualifying offer for 2026 is 22 and a quarter, or not quite a quarter, but just over $22 million, basically. Brandon Woodruff has not pitched in a lot of games within the last 3 seasons here. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but has he made less than 30 starts total in the last 3 years?
I was going to say it's got to be close to. I mean, it's definitely not a full season worth of starts over the last 3. I can't imagine it is.
I'm going to look it up real quick. 23.
Yeah.
So 23, 24, 25, he's made 23 total starts. And again, he was still very good when he came off the injured list, and he showed that he can still get outs with reduced velocity. But I mean, this would be a pretty big commitment here. And the interplay between this is always interesting because basically by a big part of this is by extending this, if he turns it down and signs elsewhere, you get a comp pick in the draft. This is like the Brewers got a comp pick at the end of the first round for Willie Adames because they extended him a qualifying offer. He signed somewhere else, but you knew Adames was never going to take it because he was in line for a big payday. If I'm Brandon Woodruff, I think he's got to take this. And granted, I don't know what the market looks like, but I just have a hard time believing that he's going to exceed an annual value of $22 million in a free agent contract right now. Maybe he gets a 2-year that pushes him over that in total earnings. I don't know if he's getting more than 22 million annually on a new deal right now. Like, he does seem like a guy who probably could still use another full bounce back season and then really put himself in good position. Of course, he is going into his age 33 season, so maybe part of it is he just wants some kind of multi-year guarantee at this point. I don't know. But it's interesting because this seems like one where, I get what you're going for if you're the Brewers, but I think there is a high likelihood that he takes this. And do the Brewers think there's a high likelihood he takes this? Do they think that he's probably going to turn it down? I don't know. I think he really needs to think about it, though. I have a hard time, like I said, believing that there's going to be something significantly better out there than this. But he's got until November 18th to make that decision. So he's got a little over a week here. And then another note here as well, we talked about like the buyouts with mutual options. Adam did report that $10 million buyout actually counts toward the 2025 payroll. So that really had no factor in the decision to tender a qualifying offer to him, because that $10 million is already on the books. It's not $10 million and then you're adding $22 million on it for 2026. The $10 million counts for 2025. If he accepts the qualifying offer, that $22 million counts for 2026. But even so, this is an interesting one. And Lance on Twitter did ask us, does the qualifying offer to Woodruff hurt or help the chances of him returning? In line with what I said, I would say it makes it more likely that he comes back.
Yeah, I agree. I think the question is for sure what you talked about. I think it's, are there multi-year offers out there, and maybe even, 2 years, 35 million instead of 1 year, 22 million, where you give up a little bit of the guarantee per year, but you guarantee yourself 35 more million, knowing your injury history and knowing what you have going on. and knowing that you might only be able to pitch one more year or not even that if things go poorly. And obviously you don't want to think like that as a player, but I think you have to at least factor it in when you're looking for a deal in a situation like Woodruff is in. So does he get somebody who's willing to do something like that? I don't know. I think the interesting part about this offseason is going to be, for me, how many multi-year deals are actually handed out to players who aren't like sure things or, like 4 or 5 year deals, because, and we're not going to get into this and we're mostly avoiding it, but I think it has to factor in here. Like, most people seem to think a lockout is going to happen in 2027. And does that affect how players are looking for contracts out there? Does that affect how teams are willing to hand out contracts, given they don't know exactly what's going to be happening at this time next year? I don't know. We really don't know how that's going to go, but I think it's going to play a role. I think it's going to have some sort of effect, and we won't know what that effect is until we start seeing it play out. So, like you said, Woodruff has, from this day, he has 12 days basically to decide if he wants to accept it. I would imagine there's going to be a lot of talk between him and his agent and trying to figure out what his market's going to look like and see if he thinks anything out there is going to make sense in comparison. But to answer Lance's question, I'm with you. I think this helps his chances of returning. I think there's a pretty good chance this is the best deal he gets. It gives him another year, like you said, to, maybe a tick or two returns on the fastball more consistently, a year further removed from the surgery. And he's able to even make 20 starts next year and show that off. Like, then he probably does have a little bit more out there than what would essentially be, if I'm comparing it to 2 years, 35, like he would need to just make more than 13 the next year for him to beat that type of offer. Like, that's the math he's going to be playing in his head. And I think most of the time that's going to end up leading back to this qualifying offer being his best option. So I think there's a pretty good chance he's a Brewer next year. I think it's most likely, if he is, going to be via the qualifying offer. I don't think they'll go out and make him much more of a multi-year offer. You never know. Maybe they can find a 2-year. Maybe they're the team willing to do 2 years, 30-some million instead to save a little bit in 26, and maybe it's another option type deal. Yeah, I don't know which way they would go, but I do think he's much more likely to be a Brewer with them extending this today. I think I already thought there was a decent chance. I think we both talked about that we thought there was a pretty decent chance he would end up staying around, but now I think it went up. And just to quickly touch on the other part of this with the mutual option counting towards the 2025 payroll, that was actually, I mean, I don't think it got a ton of attention on social media, and I get it. It's not the most exciting thing, but that was like one of the most interesting things I had seen, because I've always, like, no matter what, in my head, kind of counted those buyouts towards the next season. And you talked about, like, that's usually how they're doing it. They're kind of moving the money around to try and move it in that season. But I was talking to Lucas in Twitter DMs today, and he was saying, like, I wonder if sometimes it's just to move the timing of the paying the money that year out. Like, in the off season, when you have less expenses that you have to worry about day to day, making that moving that money. Like, I wonder if this is more common than we know about. I don't really know. They're not usually this. We don't usually hear anything like this. So it was interesting to me, because I don't know how it normally works. I've always assumed it was more of a push it to the next year, push it to that budget. But it did make me curious. And I thought Lucas's point was pretty reasonable and solid. Like, there's different expenses that happen in the season that maybe it's just more comfortable for the Brewers to pay that money out, then have a little bit more like liquid money to move around during the season. I don't know, but I thought that was a super interesting part of the equation here that I just never had even thought that it might be included in the same year's budget. So yeah, that was the only other thing I wanted to add. But to wrap it up, I do think he ends up being a Brewer, and I think it'll end up being on the qualifying offer deal.
You did touch on something that we probably should have gone into earlier too with this, from the Brewers' perspective, which is they're probably not offering him this if they don't feel pretty good about his health outlook for next year.
Yes.
And like, the likelihood that something comes back a little bit and he's a little bit stronger in 2026 than he was this year. Maybe, like you said, another tick or two comes back. They said at the end of the year that lat injury was not connected to the shoulder at all. Woodruff did kind of suggest that it's something that can pop up after you come back from that kind of surgery because it's all kind of in that area, but it's not something that's directly attached
Right.
to the shoulder. So the shoulder's intact. Everything is okay there. They probably don't extend this if they don't feel pretty good about his health outlook because, like we talked about, probably a pretty good chance that he takes this, and they would not want to be on the hook for a guy who, is probably going to be, for as effective as he was, still throwing 92 miles an hour, maybe 90 to 92 some days, and has the health and the durability concerns. Someone who might only start 15 games a year. Like, they're not throwing that out if they think that's what their internal projection is for him. So I think you can kind of read into this a little bit too and say that they feel pretty good about
Yeah.
how he came back and then where they think he might progress another year removed from that whole operation and that whole rehab process.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely part of it. And like you said, the Brewers must feel very comfortable with paying him this money if he ends up accepting it. Like, just generally, they must feel fine with giving him 22 million in 2026 because there's no way they offered him that thinking there was no chance that he would resign or that he would take it. Like, I'm sure they're aware of a very real possibility of it, which, yeah, I think that leads into the feeling good about his health. I think that leads into, obviously, we've talked about it before. They were willing to give him quite a bit of money to come back, even knowing that they had no idea what was going to happen. So Brandon Woodruff's connection to the team and to the clubhouse and everything obviously means a lot to them too. But again, I don't think this is a case of like, oh, we're willing to bring him back just because he's a good guy and because we know if he is healthy, he can help us a little bit. Like, they must feel comfortable. They must feel very good about what they're seeing in terms of progression in his rehab and progression in terms of, like I said, and like you said, maybe getting even a step back closer to where he used to be in terms of the pure stuff. So yeah, I guess we'll see how it plays out, but I would imagine they feel pretty good about him being back if he takes it. And I really do think that's what's going to end up happening.
Let's move on to the coaching side of things. There was some news there earlier on Thursday and a little bit of news that broke on Wednesday night as well. Rickie Weeks is no longer going to be in the dugout moving forward. So he spent 2 years as Pat Murphy's associate manager. He was announced with Murphy when there was all that change at the top of the coaching chain a couple of years ago. But he's now going to be moving into the front office. His new title is Special Assistant, Baseball Operations, and Domestic and International Scouting. So basically, he's going to have a very heavy hand in player development, specifically drafting international free agents, that kind of stuff. This is a excerpt from the release that came from the Brewers on Thursday afternoon. Quote, in his new role, Weeks will assist with the evaluation of draft eligible and international players as he attends player tryouts, key tournaments, and signing day events. He will be instrumental in preparation for the first year player draft and assist in the recruiting and evaluation process of possible player signings, both professional and amateur. Additionally, Weeks will work with baseball operations leadership on player acquisitions and the assessment and recommendation of on-field rules changes and other changes relative to on-field competition. So I think there's a couple things that are interesting here. The first note, just to talk about Weeks himself. When he was announced as the associate manager, I think kind of the assumption from everybody was, okay, Murph is kind of the bridge guy here because they need some stability here. They need a holdover after Counsell left. Murph has been around a while. He knows the clubhouse, knows the guys, should be just kind of a good brace to keep in place. And then he can kind of run the ship for maybe not even the entirety of that 3-year contract as Weeks kind of learns the ropes a little bit and he ends up being really the true long-term successor to Craig Counsell in that manager's chair. But that's not how it's shaking out. So, Pat Murphy's going to win manager of the year for the second time in his 2 years as the Brewers manager. Counsell couldn't win it, kept finishing in second place numerous times. And now here's Pat Murphy as like what, the second or third NL manager ever to win it 2 years in a row, most likely, and he does it in his first 2 years. Um, but so obviously Murph is not on the hot seat by any stretch of the imagination. He does have that 1 year left on his deal, but I would guess that we're kind of in a position where he's probably got the job for as long as he wants it now. Weeks, meanwhile, this is sort of full circle for him a little bit. It wasn't like full front office when he first rejoined the org. It was like a player development type
Yeah.
ordeal. He started like kind of boots on the ground player development back in Arizona, I believe, at the complex. And he was briefly promoted to a little bit more of a front office kind of player development role. But then after all this stuff went down, he ended up as the associate manager. But now he's going back into more of that side of the game as a special assistant to Matt Arnold. And, this is just interesting to me because, like, being around the ballpark for the last 2 years and, I don't have nearly as much experience like with Rickie Weeks, or, I've talked to him a few times throughout the last couple of years. Um, but this was interesting for me to see because, like, the thing that I just felt the last couple of years was, you know, Weeks was fine in the job that he had, and it, seemed to do a good job of relating to players. Like that, I think that was a reason why they gave him this role anyway, after he started on kind of the complex side. But I just you just never really, I feel like, at the ballpark got the sense as time was going along that he was going to be that guy to follow up Murph, especially compared to like some of the other coaches. There's a part of me speculatively that wonders if like this is just kind of, he had some time to feel it out. And Matt Arnold did talk to a couple of reporters. Um, Adam McCalvey had a bunch of quotes in his story on this where it sounded like this was kind of, they all got together and just kind of had a discussion about what was actually the best way for Rickie Weeks to continue his career on more of like the staff side of baseball. And it seems like this is kind of what they landed on. And it's honestly not surprising to me because, again, just like it's hard to kind of put into words, but I just never, being around the ballpark, I just never fully got the sense as time went along that he actually was maybe the guy who was going to be the next man up in the way that maybe we all thought when they announced kind of this new coaching staff structure under Murphy.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sounds like to me, and just based on reading tea leaves and not being around him, but just everything that I can observe from where I am, I don't know that he ever really wanted to be that guy. Like, I think maybe he thought, okay, well, if I really like this role, if I'm really comfortable with it, if I feel like I'm ready to do that, that might be something that could be in my cards in the future. But I don't know that it was like, oh, I'm taking this job so that I can be the next in line. Like, I don't even think that was his thought. I think, like you said, it was the prevailing thought in the media and for fans and everybody, just because of how it went down. He was in a position not too dissimilar from what Counsell was originally in the front office. And then he takes a job with, again, like you said, at the time, everyone kind of viewed it as, oh, Murph is probably a 1, 2, maybe 3 year kind of bridge the gap type of guy. And then you go to your young guy that you want to have be your manager for the long haul. You covered every reason why for Murph that has changed. But I do wonder if like this is just more. Weeks enjoyed his time doing the front office stuff more. And now he wants to go back into that role because that's what he enjoyed more. Maybe that's what he thinks he's better at. Maybe that's what he thinks he can help the organization and the team with more than his role that he had on the bench. And I think, yeah, like you said, with the quotes that we have, it just felt like everybody kind of agreed, like, hey, this might just be better. This might be better for Rickie's career. This might be better for the Brewers. And they came to an agreement that, I mean, we'll see how it plays out. We'll see how he does in this role. But like, if I were to guess, a little bit more behind the scenes might be something Weeks would be a little bit better at. And that might just be unfair based on like watching interviews and stuff. I mean, some guys are just a little less comfortable in front of the camera and in that type of setting. So I don't know how he interacts with players and everything else. But to me, it was always a little hard to envision him being like the leader of men. And I guess when you look at Counsell, like you never really would have guessed that from the way he talked to the media or the way he interacted with them either. But you always heard from players about how solid he was in that regard. So it just never struck me as that being like a strong suit of his. Yes, in this bench role, like you can be that guy who's a little bit more behind the scenes with the guys. You don't need to have your face out there. You don't need to be out in the public eye. And I'm not saying you have to be able to do that stuff to be a good manager, but I think it helps. And I think when things are going poorly, having a strong voice and somebody who's comfortable in that setting who can kind of keep things moving is important. And I always wondered if that was something he'd be able to handle. So yeah, I mean, I think he can do a good job in this role. It sounds like they liked what he was doing when he was originally in the player dev role. And he's always had a pretty good eye for talent from what people have said and kind of how we hear about these things. Like he's always had a pretty good eye for that stuff. So you have a former major league player, major league all-star who's going to be involved in some of the, talking to players through negotiations, and a guy who can kind of put himself in their shoes, and also a guy that they can look at and be like, okay, he's pretty confident that he can help me and he knows what it takes to get this done at the big league level and through pro ball. So I could see this being a really good fit for everyone involved. And yeah, I think the most interesting part of this to me is that they decided not to specifically fill the role and that they're going to kind of fill it internally just by reassigning certain parts of the job to different people. So that was the most interesting part. But yeah, we'll see how he does. I think this could be a good fit, and I think there are some definite positives to what he could bring to the table in this role.
Yeah, just to speak to kind of what I've seen the last couple of years, like again, every time that I've talked to Rickie, like nice guy, never picked up that there were any problems or anything, or that he wasn't doing a good job in his role. Um, but he did kind of give off like the vibe of a little bit of a quieter guy. Sometimes Lori Nickel actually did a feature about him um, in the second half at one point this year. I can't remember when exactly, but it was a really good story. And Rickie did talk about how it kind of took him a while before he felt like he could speak up a little bit more in his capacity, and how he naturally sometimes is more of a quiet guy. And I do think you kind of got that sense sometimes around the ballpark, just seeing him. But again, like the couple times that I spoke to him, nice enough, like knows baseball, didn't seem like there was any issue there. Um, but you do kind of compare that with the demeanor that you see from some of the other coaches, like Matt Erickson, for example,
Yeah.
way more energetic guy. Like he's the guy who's kind of, especially with the infielders, because that's who he worked. But he's out there every day. He's working very closely, like hands-on with the infielders, but he's usually like pretty chatty. There's just a lot of energy kind of emanating from that guy, like positive energy emanating from that guy. He can kind of goof around with the guys a little more. He just seems to be a little more social in that regard. Chris Hook kind of sometimes is the same way with some of the pitchers when you see them working in pregame on the field. Like you pick up on that stuff a little bit, and I never quite always saw that stuff with Rickie. And again, I don't see what goes on behind closed doors, but that's just from what I would see every day at the ballpark for during pregame when these guys are doing their work on the field and getting ready and all that stuff. So, I do wonder if they just kind of decided, hey, maybe this is the side of the game that your skill set and your personality and all this stuff is just better suited for. But again, from everything you hear, like I have no doubt that he's going to do well in this
Mhm.
role. And if he's found something now and they've settled on something that probably fits him the best, I think that's a good thing. But yes, back to your point, that is what I was going to bring up next. As the other side of this, they're not going to name a replacement for him. And the interesting thing here to me is like, so Rickie Weeks' role was like very similar to like a traditional bench coach. They named him an associate manager because they were basically trying to say he's doing a little more than just what a traditional bench coach would. But this kind of comes back to really what's been going on in baseball for the last couple of years, and including on this Brewers coaching staff. Coaching staffs keep getting bigger. There's more and more guys. Like the Brewers have had 3 hitting coaches. We'll talk about that next. They have 2 pitching coaches because Hook and Henderson has been an assistant pitching coach now for a couple of years. They've got guys who, like Walker McKinven was here as a run prevention coordinator, like, and they still have a lot of the staffs are getting bigger. There's more titles now being thrown around. Like there's just more to it now. And when you have more guys, I think you've seen it happen for a few years now, and now this is kind of continuation of it. Like normal roles and titles, like I think all of this stuff is starting to be phased out and it's evolving beyond what the traditional established framework of a coaching staff has always been for much of the game's history, where it was like very like manager, bench coach, one hitting coach, one pitching coach, like all this stuff. It's expanding a little bit and it's evolving. And I think this is kind of the next step here. Um, Murph has kind of talked about this a little bit. Like it is largely he's the manager, but it seems like it's a pretty diplomatic, all hands on deck approach from the bench. Like he talks all the time about how he takes a lot of input from not only Rickie, but like the pitching coaches, the hitting coaches, the the defensive coaches, like all this stuff. Like it's a very, very hands-on thing. So this is not the first time, even within the last couple of years, that the Brewers have lost a guy or he's moved to a new role and they're not naming a replacement. Like when McKinven left to become the White Sox bench coach, the Brewers did not name a replacement. They gave a lot of his responsibilities to a combination of Henderson and then Daniel DeMondezert, who's you see him in like the post game interviews. He does a lot of the translating for some of the Spanish speaking guys, and he's a younger guy, but he's very involved in a lot of like the strategy kind of stuff on the bench. So between these kind of guys, between DeMondezert, between Nestor Corredor, who started as his title is Major League Field Coordinator, which doesn't make it sound like he's a coach, but he's actually also become very, very involved on the catching side, especially now with McKinven gone as well. Like between DeMondezert, Corredor, Matt Erickson, even Barone and Jason Lane, the base coaches, like they still have a lot of coaches on this staff and a lot of guys who I think they already do a little more work than you might guess from their titles, at least some of them. So I think they are in a good position where it is going to be a pretty seamless way of kind of divvying up what Rickie was doing and assigning it to these other guys. But again, this is going to be very abnormal. Like this is going to be a Major League Baseball team that doesn't have a bench coach. Like bench coach is a very established position. I don't know if I can think of another MLB team that's going to go into next year without a bench coach or some equivalent of that. But I think this is kind of this kind of speaks to the way that coaching staffs are continuing to evolve. It would not shock me if this is something where, the Brewers end up not being the only team that does something like this. Maybe it does catch on elsewhere, depending on how different teams have their staff structured. But for the Brewers, where it's like so many guys who kind of dip their hands into different areas, it's a big staff, a lot of interaction between the guys, a lot of collaboration between groups. I do wonder if they just kind of like that's how it works and they want to lean into that more. And that just might be the way things start trending now with some of these roles. I think we're going to continue to see titles and all this kind of stuff change as teams are defining their coaching staffs moving forward. But this is definitely an interesting domino to fall that's going to kind of kick that off with a team not having anybody who's got that bench coach kind of title.
Yeah, so I'm on the same page as you and thinking that this will not happen, but I've seen a lot of people speculating like, oh, they're not going to fill the associate manager title, but they're going to give somebody the bench coach title. And I don't think that's what they're saying or the way they're going to go. I guess I can't rule it out. Technically, their wording did not say that they're not going to do that. But it sounded to me like they're just going to spread it out and let guys handle it from the position they have. They might change some of the titles that some of the current coaches have or add an additional, some verbiage in there that changes it to make it sound a little bit different. But I don't think they're going to do that. Now, I do also want to say,
not to cut you off, but the Brewers did say in the press release, like the responsibility, direct quote, the role of associate manager will not be replaced, but the responsibilities of the position will be redistributed and taken on by other members plural, of the coaching staff. So to me, that's pretty clear cut. Like, I don't think there's a lot of loopholes in there for naming a new equivalent with a different title. Like, that seems pretty clear. Like, the role of associate manager and then the responsibilities will be redistributed to other members of the coaching staff.
I agree. I posted the exact quote to a couple of people, and they still pushed back and said, well, they could give the normal bench coach title and then give a couple of the other things that Rickie, the additional part that made him associate manager to some other people. I was like, I guess I can't tell you no for sure. I guess we'll find out. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to just be spread out. And I think we should also point out here that even with Dawson leaving, and which we'll get to in a minute, and Rickie Weeks moving to the front office, the Brewers will have 13 coaches on their coaching staff. The Cubs currently have 13 coaches on their coaching staff, and the Dodgers just won the World Series with 11 coaches on their coaching staff. So, like, if the Brewers don't fill this hole, I feel like people are going to use they're being cheap, they're not doing, like, that type of thing again. I don't think that's it. I think you could even, Jack talked about, these staffs are getting really big, and I don't know that they can keep getting bigger. I think at some point you got to kind of cut it off. And the Brewers may have also come to the conclusion at some point that, like, okay, we're getting a little too big. Like, this is getting to be a lot of voices. This is getting to be a lot of people with input. Like, maybe we find the sweet spot with 13. Maybe they hire a hitting coach back and have a third one again, and it's 14 or something. But I do wonder if they also saw that as, like, okay, we don't even have necessarily the room or the actual need for some of these, for all of these coaches at once. So maybe I don't think they wanted to lose Connor Dawson. We'll get into that in a second. But maybe that's another reason they go, okay, Rickie, let's find you a role that's better for you, that's better for us. And then we don't need to find somebody to replace it. We can just go internally, have fewer voices that are constantly around the team. I don't know, but I think that could be part of it. And I do wonder, like I said, I think at some point you get to a point of diminishing return with that many coaches on the staff. Like, when does that limit hit? At some point, like, you're over, if you're at 13 coaches, that's one for every 2 players technically on the roster at any given point. That was never the case in the old days. I think it's fine to have a bunch of people and have a bunch of specific roles for people. But again, like, how many people can a certain player hear from? And I'm sure they're on the same page. I'm sure they're not contradicting each other a lot, but there's different types of coaches and there's different types of ways people attack things. And it still might lead to confusion. It still might lead to certain things if you have too many voices. So I don't know if that's part of it. I really don't, but it's just another part of it that I kind of thought of, like, maybe they're also getting to the point where they don't think they should have this many coaches or they need this many coaches. And that's part of the equation too. But like I said, if they don't fill that spot, it will not be because the Brewers are being cheap. They will be in line with everyone else, with a bunch of competitive teams in terms of the size of their coaching staff. They just before had one of the bigger ones in baseball. So I wouldn't worry about it in that regard either. I already had some people who were concerned about that or saying it already. Like, it'll be all right. They're not being cheap. They're making this decision for baseball reasons, and that's it.
I don't know how much it's been reported, but, like, when Mark Anastasio speaks to the media, I've asked him a few times, like, about the resources that they put into player development, and he has said a couple times that the amount that they pour into personnel and coaches is actually pretty high. Now, again, that's just him speaking in generalities. So, take that how you will. But, like, it has been, someone from the team has said before on record that, like, they have a lot of coaches, and that's by design. Like, that's something they focus on, and they want to pour resources into that because they are serious about player development. So, the complaining because there's one coach for sure moving into the front office and there's another one who's leaving, I think there are bigger fish to fry here. But we should talk about Connor Dawson briefly. Robert Murray reported on Wednesday night that the Royals were going to hire Connor Dawson to their staff, and Arnold did confirm to a couple of reporters on Thursday that that is indeed happening. He's leaving the staff to go to Kansas City. He's from Kansas City as well, or from that area at least. So it is a little bit of a homecoming for him. Dawson was with the Brewers starting with, I don't have it in the notes. I believe it was starting with the 2022 season was his first year because that was when they kind of
Pretty
switched
sure.
to that co-hitting coach model with him and Ozzie Timmons. This last year, he was working as a co-hitting coach um, with Eric Tyson under lead hitting coach Al LaBeouf. But Kurt Hogue said this on social media. Dawson worked with Yelich a lot. Um, he was also just like one of the guys who was there the entire year. LaBeouf is the head guy, but he was kind of in and out at times with some health issues. So I do think this has the potential to be a pretty decent loss for the Brewers. Dawson's been a pretty well regarded guy. He's been in a couple different orgs. It hasn't been reported what role exactly he's going to have in Kansas City, but I would imagine it's upward from what he had
Yeah.
in Milwaukee if he's moving on, which good for him. He probably deserves it, but a pretty good hitting mind who's played a pretty big role in the Brewers org. He's worked closely with some of their hitters. So Matt Arnold did say it was, not a loss that they wanted, but he's moving on to a new capacity, a new role. So Nick asked us on Twitter, it's hard to quantify the impact of coaching changes, although the loss of Quentin Berry definitely seemed noticeable. What kind of effect, if any, do you think the loss of Connor Dawson and Rickie Weeks moving to a front office role will have on the team next year? Honestly, there's a part of me that's wondering, like, do they lean even more into the small ball style of play without Connor Dawson here? Because, like, again, I don't know all of the ins and outs of how that dynamic of the three coaches worked, but I mean, on the occasion that you could talk to Dawson, hitting coaches aren't super available to the media like some of the other coaches are because they're doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff in the cage and all this stuff during pregame. I mean, he was the story that I talked to him for when I wrote about Bryce Harang. He was very clearly able to lay out like their ideal progression of like adding bat speed and meeting the ball out in front more and how you have to work that in and how that evolution needs to occur naturally. And you can't force it, but it's something that they do want guys to work on, like get the ball out in front more, swing harder. And I would imagine like the existing guys probably don't disagree with that. But Dawson is the only guy I've heard talk about it. So maybe it's just me saying that because I haven't had a chance to speak to some of the other guys. But, you hear Dawson talk about that. And then you hear like Pat Murphy, for example, say that he's, going to tase Sal Frelick every time he tries to swing too hard. So I don't know. Um, I do think LaBeouf is a pretty good hitting mind, though, from what I've heard. So that's obviously, I think, should be a source of comfort. But I am just curious because like Dawson definitely seemed like more of the new school guy. I am curious kind of what this leads to. I don't think there's going to be like a dramatic change to their approach, but there is a part of me that does wonder, like, are they suddenly now going to lean even harder into kind of the scrapping away style, which Dawson wasn't against that. Like he talked about how that was important to their identity too. But I think he had a really good understanding of the balance of like when to do that and knowing that that was a strength for a lot of guys while also behind the scenes being like, okay, we got to develop a little more out of you if we can. And I'm curious now, maybe what I'm getting at is I'm curious now if losing him impacts their ability to get guys to that next level at the big league level. Like, does it make it harder to, have a Bryce Terang kind of evolution with some guys? I don't know. Um, but that's kind of where my mind is upon hearing that he's leaving. As far as Weeks, I really don't, again, kind of everything we talked about. I don't think you're going to see a big difference there just because they have so many guys, assuming most of them come back. There's no official announcements on the coaching staff yet. We should note that too. There could be some other changes, but assuming most of those core guys come back, um, I would imagine that they're all going to be good enough at kind of filling in what Weeks did that you're probably not going to see much of an impact there. So again, it kind of comes back more to the hitting side for me. Like, how big was Dawson in kind of getting guys to more of that progression where maybe they could hit for a little more power and do some of those things and kind of applying that analytical side of hitting a little more. Because again, and like I could I could be wrong. Maybe the other guys are very well versed in that as well. I'm sure they have some fairly decent knowledge of that stuff. They wouldn't be in this position if they didn't. But again, Dawson was the only one who like I heard talk about this kind of stuff and articulate it very well. So I am curious what happens now that he's gone kind of on that front.
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate loss for the coaching staff. Now, this is a guy who they shook up the hitting coach structure over the last couple of years, and he survived all of them. And they kept him through those times. So, like, they clearly thought very highly of him as a coach. And this is a guy who got the job. I believe he was 28 when he got the job, 29 maybe. He had already been the Mariners minor league hitting coordinator by that point, like for the entire minor leagues, not just like at one level. Like he was running the Mariners hitting development at the top. And he'd done that in his mid 20s. So this is a guy who had a really good track record. He had shown that, like you said, even when I go back to when they hired him, and I don't know what the interview was exactly, but he was interviewed on some sort of podcast or something when he was with the Mariners, and I listened to it just to hear like how he talked about hitting, and it was similar to what you just talked about. Like he had an idea of like, okay, we're not going to make guys be who they aren't. We want them to be who they are as hitters, but we want to build upon that. We want to make it better. We want to see what we can get out of them while not losing the stuff that they are already very good at. And, you know, that's really important. And like you said, we have no idea if Alabuff and Eric Tyson, we just don't know. We haven't heard from them a lot. Tyson's definitely younger, so like that's not, but he's not low 30s like like Dawson is. So you just wonder about the type of approach they have, and we just don't know. I mean, I know Alabuff made it as far as he did, and he did a very good job in AAA because he had kind of embraced some of the more modern stuff while also going back to his roots, which is more of the old school hard knocks. Let's hit the ball in play. Let's have the Sal Frelick approach that we saw, especially the first couple of years. You hope that maybe over the year working with Dawson and maybe even just beyond that, maybe he already had this in his toolbox, but like you hope that he has learned that, yes, you want them to be very, very good at that type of stuff. And especially a lot of the players the Brewers have, that is going to be their number one strength as a hitter. But building upon it, can they do it? Can they continue to build upon what they already have? Like, do we, this makes me wonder, like, do we see the Turang power breakout that we were kind of expecting to see over the course of a full season if some of the stuff reverts back in terms of the teachings and in terms of how they talk about things? And we don't know. We have no idea. We also don't know that they're not going to fill this spot. Like they still might add a third hitting coach, and it might be another guy who is in that type of mindset and that type of approach to hitting to try and, you know, kind of bring in that type of voice again to that group of three, because the results were very good offensively this year. Like you would think they'd probably want to keep a similar approach and keep a similar point of attack in terms of like how they're approaching it from a coaching staff's point of view. So maybe they do bring in another guy who's just similar to Dawson in terms of beliefs and the way he teaches. And I have no idea. There's some good minor league. Internally, there are some good people down there who might be able to fill that type of role for the Brewers, and they might go that direction. We have no clue. But if they don't, I think that'll be the concern for me. And like you said, it's similar for you. I think that's what we have to see. We won't know. And that's just the one thing I would be worried about, is that we lean too much into, for lack of a better term, Murph ball. And it's a good thing in a lot of ways. But if it's all the time, I question whether it can work in that capacity. So I think you have to have that balance, and that'll be the concern for me. And Weeks, I agree. I don't think we'll see anything noticeable with him moving to this role, because what he was doing is pretty behind the scenes to begin with. I think a lot of it was like confidence building, and a lot of it was walking guys through certain situations that maybe they haven't experienced, that he has experienced, that type of stuff. Like, I don't think that'll be a noticeable change. But it could be something that some of the players miss, if they've gotten used to having that crutch or that guy there to help them out. So you never know. But I think the noticeable one, if there is one, will be Dawson for sure.
The Murph ball thing is funny because and speaking from experience here the last 2 years, if you can get Murph going on hitting, he sounds a lot more new school than you would expect.
I know.
Like you can get like I got in my Terang story as well. I had a lot of quotes from him on kind of that process of knowing that there was, and he did actually say throughout the year, like, I think there's more power in Bryce's bat and he's going to get there. So it is all that stuff. Like, okay, knowing that, yes, he can, if he goes about it the right way, get to a point where he's catching the ball in front more, pulling more in the air. Like, air pull is good. He knows that air pull is good. He knows that you don't want guys hitting a ton of ground balls all the time. Like, he has said all this stuff enough times to know that he gets that. But then it feels like sometimes when it actually comes time to put stuff into practice, he kind of reverts back to a little bit more of that, like, okay, your job is to just poke a little line drive to left or hit a
Yeah.
ground ball to left. Like, he does that a lot with Sal too. Like, I don't want him trying to do this too much. And sometimes it makes sense too. Like, you get it. Like, if you go about this stuff the wrong way, it can actually make you a
Hmm.
lot worse as a hitter. So there is a delicate balance to it. But yeah, it just kind of comes back to like and again, like I have varying levels of experience interacting with all of these guys, but in my limited experience, like, I got the sense that Dawson seemed to have a very, very good grasp on kind of what that balance looks like and what that process should look like. And now I'm curious now to see A, if they replace him or not, and then B, how the returning guys kind of approach that same kind of work. That's going to be fascinating to watch. So, but we're going to find out. So we shall see. A couple more housekeeping moves to go over here really quick. Uh, the Brewers did activate Garrett Mitchell and Logan Henderson from the 40-man or from the 60-day injured list. And then before that, they also added Coleman Crow to the 40-man roster. That was back when they made a bunch of these option decisions. So the 40-man roster is now at 38. Coleman Crow, by adding him to the 40-man roster, the Brewers protected him from the Rule 5 draft. He's locked in with the team. I don't have the count on me. Does that also prevent him from electing minor league free agency?
Yep, that was the main thing they had to worry about this time. He would have just been a free agent that could have signed with anybody. So, yeah, that was because of all the injuries he's dealt with. It doesn't feel like he should be at that point based on when he was drafted and everything else, but he was at the point where he was out of minor league control and they had to add him just to avoid him declaring minor league free agency, which would have been today.
Okay. But basically, it guarantees that he's going to play a role next year if he's healthy. And we've talked about Coleman Crow before, so we don't need to dive into too much,
Mm-hmm.
but very good breaking balls. The fastball's not great, but can play up from that slot if he's throwing it at the top. There's a lot of ingredients here that the Brewers have had success with before. So I do think he's a guy who they believe is going to be able to give them good innings if he's healthy. And I would agree with that. It wouldn't shock me if he's a guy who kind of comes up mid-season and maybe has a little run where he's able to fill in for some injured starters and he does pretty well and kind of carves out a little bit of a niche as kind of an up and down guy a little bit, but is able to give the Brewers some good results when he's on the bump.
Yeah, and with kind of a budding changeup added to the repertoire too, that was playing really well at the end and flashing some pretty good metrics in the few that he was able to show on Statcast in AAA. So yeah, I mean it's a 4-pitch mix, really 5, but he doesn't really use the sinker much at all. Knowing the Brewers, that may change when he gets to the big leagues, but I don't think it will. It doesn't really play super well with the rest of his pitches, but yeah, I mean, it's not huge velo, but it's a fastball that had a pretty solid vertical approach angle when it was in AAA and in AA, and the breaking balls are really really good. I mean, they're high spin, lots of movement, sharp movement, two different types. He's kind of throwing a cutter too, so that fits with what the Brewers like to do at times. So yeah, if he's healthy, he'll be on the Brewers at some point next year getting innings. I don't know what capacity that will be in, but he will pitch for the Brewers if he's healthy and able to give innings.
We'll move on to a couple of listener questions that we didn't touch on already. Ron asked us on Twitter, really curious if you guys think there will be a new position player on the 40 this winter, be it promotion, trade, or free agent. I don't know about position player. I would actually pitcher would seem a little bit more likely to me. Maybe they just add like another bullpen arm who's kind of in that mix. I don't know about position player though, because I feel like the only area that we've talked about where there might be something that happens is shortstop, but then that would be like Cooper Pratt forces his way into the mix or something, and then you add him to the 40 man, which would be an internal thing. I don't think they're replacing Joey Ortiz externally at this point. So maybe if they
Yeah,
swing some kind of trade and they deal from another position, but I would bet on a new pitcher on the 40 before I would bank on a new position player.
yeah, and I think that's why he's asking. I think, like, I'm sure most people, if you were to ask them and there wasn't much thought behind it, would probably be like, yeah, at some point they're going to add somebody that will be added to the 40 man. But I agree with you. I don't know that there's a clear cut path to that happening. Um, you know, nobody saw the William Contreras trade coming a few years ago. Like, that type of possibility presents itself to the Brewers. They are willing to jump, and they've showed that they will do that in the past. Um, for a clear upgrade at a position of need, like, yeah, they are willing to do that, and they will do it if it's the right timing. But there's not many clear upgrades right now in terms of places to be upgraded. We talked about that last time we recorded. Like, it's probably the fewest holes or the fewest like openings on the roster that we've had in a long time going into an offseason with the Brewers. And with 2 open spots right now, that could include Brandon Woodruff coming back, would take one of them, obviously, because he's not currently on it. But yeah, if they have another open spot, like, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a Grant Anderson type of trade for somebody in the bullpen with some controllable years, somebody that they like. Or, they play the waiver game a lot during the offseason when they have open spots, and they might claim somebody. They might even claim them and then push them back out there and hope that he gets through waivers during the offseason. Like, they do a lot of that stuff, but it all feels like it's more likely to be pitchers unless there's some surprise trade. I think that's when maybe you see something happen with a position player. Or maybe, I don't even know who it would be. I haven't looked at the free agency, but if some sort of utility guy comes along that they view as a clear upgrade to Monasterio or something like that, I mean, maybe that type of thing, but that's really the way I look at it. I think the other thing people would probably talk about is catcher, and I don't think they're going to add a catcher to the 40. I think they're going to add like a AAA depth piece at catcher, as somebody like maybe the Eric Haas, where it's a split deal, although he had to be on the 40 man for the split deal, didn't he? Maybe the Austin Nola deal, where they sign him to a minor league deal and bring him into camp and hope he's in AAA to be a backup option. But I think that's Jefferson K-Rose spot at backup catcher heading into next year. So I don't think they'll add anybody that will be on the 40 there.
Yeah, I mean, the utility would be my maybe, like you, but again, like I think they have enough guys. Like, they still have Mona. They like Siegler. I think Siegler's actually got a very good chance of sliding into that utility role next year and kind of being like the next Mona or Isaac Collins type guy who has a really solid season as a part timer. So I don't even know if they really think that's a worthwhile use of resources to go outside the org for that. I mean, yeah, honestly, for me, it's like in the bullpen, I think they do something with Nick Mears and they replace him somehow with an optionable reliever.
Yeah,
It's
agreed.
otherwise it's going to be a quiet offseason unless one of those crazy opportunities presents itself, like you talked about. So I I don't think there's going to be anything a whole lot of movement there, barring something that just kind of lands in their laps.
Agreed.
Mason asks, does Yelich ever do the first base thing, or does he just continue being the DH the next 2 years? I understand it's not as easy as just going to the settings on a video game and switching it, but it has been done before, and if he can do it, it would give us a lot of flexibility. So I'm going to go back to kind of what my thought was when he first signed that extension several years ago. My thought right away, speculatively, was, oh, they're signing him with maybe the thought that he's going to be their long-term first baseman. But then the universal DH came into the mix, and then it just made a lot more sense to use him there long-term. I think he could do it. He was a first baseman in high school before he got drafted. That's obviously not the same thing as playing it at this level, but he's done it before in his life, and he's a good enough athlete that I think he could probably make the transition fairly smoothly. But the number one, the Brewers they have a lefty right first base mix already going into next year, and Bowers and Vaughn. And I would imagine both of those guys start next year as that tandem over there.
Mhm.
Bowers, it showed more contact than he ever has at any point in his career in September. So that, like, a sign of hope that maybe he has finally gotten the bat to ball skills to a good enough point where that raw power can actually start to play. In which case, he probably is a guy who you want playing a lot, because that he has always had a pretty high offensive ceiling. So if he can start tapping into that more, he's a guy you want to give time out there. Vaughn feels like a guy who, if he does struggle next year and comes back down to earth, I think they could move on from pretty quickly. But again, I mean, you've got your left-handed first base option still in Bowers. I would imagine at this point it would need to take like some kind of collapse of the system's first base step before they try something like this. The other part of it too is, like, and this was kind of a thing when Braun was initially going to move over there in 2018, the back thing. If you
Mhm.
have a guy who's always struggled with back injuries, running around and potentially diving or stretching and doing all this stuff on the dirt as opposed to in the grass, there's a little less padding on the dirt. It's actually worse for guys' backs if they struggle with that. So that's obviously something you have to think of a little bit as well. I think in a lot of ways, playing left field is actually a little easier on the back sometimes than playing first base can be. There's a lot of bending and all that kind of stuff going on over there. And again, the playing surface is a little different. If you're just like being in the outfield or being in the infield and like doing your prep steps and your
I
hops and
was
all that
yeah.
stuff and like landing on the dirt every time you do that, I think that probably has a better chance of building up for a guy who's had the back ailments throughout his career. Um, I wouldn't say like for certain that it's never going to happen, but I would say there's probably I would say I'm 95% certain it's never going to happen.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that because of Bowers coming up this year, like you said, that's your left-hand option. And then you mentioned the system, like Blake Burke is mashed in double A. Decent chance he'll be in triple A soon. Luke Adams mashed in double A is mashing in the AFL. He's a first baseman. Decent chance he'll be in triple A. Brock Wilken might end up at first base. He was crushing the ball in double A before he got hurt last year. You got a bunch of guys who are reaching the higher levels of the minors. Andrew Fisher, their first round pick last year, is somebody that Baseball America picked as the only, or no, it was MLB Pipeline picked as the only position player who could be the 2026 version of Trey Savage, who's somebody who was drafted last year and comes up and helps their team right away. So, like, that's another first base option who could be here in the very near future. So it just makes it difficult to find an actual time where it would make a ton of sense for him. Now, what I would do if I were the Brewers and Yelich is comfortable with it in the back, they believe will hold up fine. I would probably have him do it in spring this year because right now the only real option is Bowers. And if he goes down, it would be nice to at least have him capable of it and able to do it in a pinch. So I would at least, I think this is the time now, a full off season, no back surgery that he's coming off of. I think this is probably the time to maybe give him a glove and get him over there and get him some reps, see where it goes. And if it's not working, you can cut it because, like we just said, he can DH. They have options at first. They'll be okay. But at least to know if it's an option, to know if he can help them when they're in a pinch. And it can even tie into what we've talked about with Contreras and everything else. Like maybe it's another way to get Contreras some DH at bats while Yelich stays in the lineup and Cairo gets some catching time. Like it could give them some more flexibility for things like that. So there's value in him being able to do it, but I would still lean towards saying that I would put it as a much higher likelihood that we never see Christian Yelich playing first base for the Brewers than that we do.
And even like again, I could see them doing what you just said, but like even then, I don't think he's actually going to get into a game at first base. Like I feel
No.
like so many things would have to go the right way or the wrong way, I guess, depending on what your view is
Yeah.
or what lens you're looking at this through. But so maybe he works out there at some point. But
Right.
again, like I said, in my mind, 95% chance he never plays any first base for the Brewers outside of maybe like a one-off cameo there once or twice. But even then, I don't think it's going to happen.
Agreed.
Well, Spencer kind of teased the AFL a little while ago, and he's got some stuff on the AFL as well as some winter league stuff. It's the Minor League Sandbox off-season edition. You can take it away.
Oh, yeah. All right. We got a couple questions for the minor league side this week. Always appreciate those. Douglas asked for a deep cut prospect breakout. So I wanted to do one, but then I decided to do a position player and a pitcher. I feel like that's not cheating. On the position player side, I'm going with Frederi Montero. He'll only turn 19 in January. He was in the Arizona Complex League all season. Only posted a 94 WRC plus, but he's 6'2", 188 pounds, moves really well for his size. Sounds like third base should be a fine spot for him defensively. His 90th percentile exit velocity in 2024 was 98.1 miles per hour. It was 103.5 in 2025. So over 5 mile per hour jump in just impacting the ball this season. His line drive rate went from 14.3% in the DSL to 25.9 in the ACL. His walk rate was solid at 13.7%. Strikeout rate, 20.3%. Not great, but also still fine, pretty average. He definitely still needs to elevate the ball more to be able to tap into what he added in terms of bat speed and strength. More fly balls would definitely go a long way. Right now, he did trade, like I said, about 10% of his grounders in the DSL for 10% line drives, but that still leaves it's a pretty low fly ball rate, and it's also a decently high infield fly ball rate, so the bat path is pretty steep. I do think there's probably going to need to be a little bit of an adjustment to the swing itself, but given his size, his athleticism, the fact that he already, as an 18-year-old, added 5 miles per hour to his 90th percentile exit velocity, going from what was below average for his age to going to well above average for an 18-year-old. Line drive rate went up, showed some good things. It sounds like he can spray the ball all over the field. He just, to me, screams somebody who kind of jumps up out of nowhere into being a legitimate prospect, because the numbers weren't great overall at either stop, the DSL or the ACL. I also think it's notable that he had a sub 100 WRC plus his first season in the DSL, and they still moved him stateside after 1 year. That means process-wise, they liked a lot of what he was doing, and they like him quite a bit, because normally if the results aren't there in DSL, they're going to hold you back, especially for someone who wasn't like a huge signing bonus guy. So the fact that they moved him means they liked him quite a bit. I think it's going to be similar, where they're going to like a lot of what they saw in the ACL this year, even though the results aren't going to jump off the page. I don't know if he starts in low A, but I think we see him in low A pretty quickly, and he'll only be 19 for the whole season. Just somebody who I think could really jump onto some radars next year, and somebody I haven't talked about a ton. I tried to avoid, it felt a little unfair for me to use people that I talk about a lot. I don't know that they're really on the radar, but this is somebody I haven't mentioned a ton that I do like quite a bit. On the pitching side, I've probably talked about this guy a little bit more. Carlos Cara, he will also turn 19. He's 19 in a couple of weeks. He's already reached low A on the season as a pitcher in the ACL and in low A. He struck out 24% of batters, only walked 5.3. He had a whiff rate of 27.4, and he threw 66% of his pitches for strikes. So a lot of strikes in and around the zone, quite a bit, and solid pitches. There's pretty interesting stuff here. We got a little bit of StatCast data when he was in the ACL. He's only 91 to 93. I think he's touched 94 before, but again, at 18 years old, that's fine velocity. High spin, pretty high spin, I should say. Curveball around 26 to 2,700 RPMs. Nothing outlier, but also above average. He throws two different versions of the fastball, mostly four seam though, and it gets pretty good carry, gets a solid vertical approach angle, misses some bats above the zone, and also mixes in a pretty solid changeup that the shape itself isn't great, but he tunneled it really well. I saw him, he pitched in low A at the end of the season, and he got a lot of bad swings on the changeup. So I think he's got a legitimate mix here. He does technically try to, he was throwing a slider in low A. He didn't have one in the ACL data, but he was definitely throwing a slider because he was throwing it harder. It was around, the curveball's around 75. The slider was in like the 81 range in low A, and it looked pretty solid. I don't know what the numbers are on it, but it looked pretty solid. So it's a 4-pitch mix at least, and interesting stuff. And a guy who had good command and also generated a decent amount of swing and miss and a decent amount of strikeouts. Like, he had a 4.3 ERA overall. I think he pitched better than that from what I can tell. He seems like somebody who could really jump onto the radar next year as a 19-year-old in low A who's performing with solid stuff, especially if maybe there's a little bit more velo in the tank as he continues to mature. The other question we got was from Kevin. It was announced the Brewers are getting a second spring breakout game. Do you have a way too early roster prediction or even a short list of guys you're excited might get the extra national exposure? So, I mean, I'll run through some names quick at the spots, but like catcher, I think you're looking at Marco Dingus, and then I don't think Cairo will be part of it because he'll be with the big league team. So probably Matt Wood, somebody like that. First base, a bunch of names I mentioned earlier: Blake Burke, Andrew Fisher, Luke Adams. Those are names. Eric Batanti could be part of it. And I think the other part of this is that there's going to be 2 games. My guess is they try to mostly have a different group play in the other game so that everybody gets a chance to kind of get that exposure and get that opportunity and that experience. And they'll still probably split the game up a little bit too for position players. But then on the middle infield, you've got Luis Pena, Jesus Mate, Cooper Pratt, Brady Ebel probably will be part of it. Third base, you've got Luke Adams, Brock Wilkin. Outfield, you've got Braylon Payne, Josh Adamszewski, Luis Lara, Jose Anderson will probably be part of it. Handelfrey, I got to train myself. Encarnacion, and maybe Josiah Ragsdale, that type of guy, the guy they drafted out of Boston College in the last draft. Pitching wise, you've got Tyson Harden, Bishop Letson, Bryce Message, Ethan Dorches, hopefully Frank Chiron. I think last year we were supposed to see Message's professional debut. He didn't get to make it. I believe he was sick. But Frank Chiron would be a fun one to see his pro debut, quote unquote, in that type of setting. Jaron DeBerry, JD Thompson from last year's draft. There's a lot of names. And like I said, I think they're going to go a lot deeper than they have in the past because my guess is they'll try and get a lot of guys the opportunity to play in those games, which it's a very cool opportunity that they have. And the fact they have 2 games made me very happy. I'm sure some other people out there as well, but specifically I was thrilled the Brewers were the Cactus League team that gets the opportunity to play 2, because that's always a fun game to watch the last couple of years. Moving into the position player side of the sandbox here, one Winter League update. Jefferson Cairo, talked about him a couple times already tonight. He is mashing down in the Venezuelan Winter League. And I had someone on Twitter ask me, like, what level would you compare this to? I would say it's like bordering on the AA, AAA level. There are major leaguers. There are former major leaguers. There are AAA players. There are former AAA players. And then there are also a couple like high A guys, low A guys who got cut from professional teams. But it's a talented league. Like, there's a lot of good talent there. It's not big league. And the hitting environment is definitely friendly towards hitters. But all that said, he's currently sporting an 1,100 OPS with 4 homers, 3 doubles. He has only caught 2 of the games he's played in so far. So that's kind of notable. The rest he's been DHing, but the power's been there. I don't know all the exit velocities, but I know the last homer he hit left the bat at 107. We've seen him up over 110 before. He has power in the bat. He's hitting well. He looked very solid to end the season in AAA, like he was back to normal in most regards, other than probably throwing the ball still not quite being where he used to be, but I would still say trending the right way in that way too. I really think he's on the big league roster to start next year, and I think they find a way to make sure he's getting playing time and staying ready to potentially take over as the big league catcher, the main big league catcher at some point in a year or two, once William Contreras has moved on to a different organization, like I expect. Moving to the AFL, we'll just do a quick update since I talked about these guys last time. Josh Adamszewski up to a 955 OPS now. Still has that grand slam. He's hit 3 other homers, so four total. Also 4 doubles. overall, like his expected weighted on base average is 400 in the fall league, which is very, very good. His 90th percentile exit velocity is 106.5. His max is 109.6. He's hitting the ball hard, 14% barrel rate. Out of zone swing rate, chase rate is only 15.5%. So that's in the 90th percentile. And his in zone swing rate is in the 80th percentile. So making really, really good swing decisions. He has a pretty high whiff rate in the AFL. Gives you a little bit of like the Oliver Dunn concern. That said, almost it's really carried by. He had 5 of what I believe is now maybe 14, 15 strikeouts. 5 of them came in the first 2 games, and he swung and missed like 10 times in the first 2 games and then pretty quickly adjusted. So I would be curious. I don't know how to break it out for baseball reference or for AFL games, but I'd be curious to see whiff rate is in just that if you took out those first 2 games. But a lot of good things from Adam Shevsky. Luke Adams, I mentioned earlier, he has a 1016 OPS, 3 doubles, 3 homers, 410 expected weighted on base average for him. Similar max exit velocity to Adam Shevsky, 105.6 on the 90th percentile. Another good barrel rate, actually better, 17.1%. Similar, does not chase hardly at all, 85th percentile on that. But he, just like he always has been, is in the first percentile for zone swing. I do think that's still going to be the thing that could potentially hold him back. He's going to have to get a bit more aggressive. He was showing it at times in AA this year before he got hurt, but you're going to have to swing a little bit more often at pitches in the zone. What is notable, though, he is in the 100th percentile for zone contact rate. So when he does swing and it's in the zone, he hits it 95.3% of the time. He will hit a pitch in the zone, and his whiff rate overall is 13.6. So, like, guy makes a ton of contact. If he can find that happy medium of swinging at more pitches in the zone, he is going to be a good hitter. Like, there is a ton here. I just worry about too passive being a problem for him at some point, but he's got a lot of talent on the offensive side. Dylan O'Ray, I didn't mention Josh Adamszewski named a fall star. So the all-star game for the AFL. Dylan O'Ray also named one of the fall stars. He has a 783 OPS. He's now raised his max exit velocity to 104.2. That's still in the 4th percentile for the AFL, but it is a higher number than I can remember for him at any point. He's 6 of 7 on stolen bases so far. I think what you're hoping for here is like a Brandon Lockridge type of player from the left side, but also with some second base in his toolkit, so he can play outfield and second base, steal a bunch of bases. He hits a lot of line drives. He's in the 95th percentile for the sweet spot, launch angle sweet spot percentage. So he hits line drives, which makes up for some of the lack of power, but it's really lacking. And that's why I think you're kind of hoping for a Lockridge type of player here. Marco Dingus is still hurt, hasn't changed anything from there. So moving to the pitching side, Carlos Rodriguez in the Winter League has gone 3 outings, 3 starts, 13 innings pitched. He struck out 14. He's only walked 5, still a bit higher than you'd want in 13 innings, but a nice ratio, still decent ratio. 7 hits allowed and only 3 earned runs. So that works out to a 2.03 ERA. Performing well out there. They seem to be pretty happy with him. The team is tweeting about him and posting him on Instagram a lot because of his solid outings. So another guy who gave a lot to the Brewers when he had the opportunity to last year. Hopefully he can keep building upon what he has because he has an interesting mix. I think it's more of a, can he become what Colin Ray was for the Brewers, or does he just settle into being that, AAA spot starter when needed? And we'll find out. AFL side for the pitchers, Michael Fowler, I've talked about a couple times now. Slowed down a little bit from his insane start, but still has not allowed an earned run through 7 innings, 8 strikeouts, now 5 walks, and 4 hits allowed. So at one point he was perfect through his first 3 innings, and it's been messy the last 4, but he has gotten out of it every time without allowing a run. His stuff's good. It's a good fastball. It's a good curveball. I think it's still going to be seen how it plays as he kind of climbs the ladder, but very interesting guy. I talked about the stuff of these guys last time, so I'll mostly skip by and just go through the stats here. Anthony Flores, 6 games. He threw 8 2/3 innings so far. He has 13 strikeouts, but also 9 walks and 3 hit by pitches. So that's not a very good ratio. That is about 1-to-1 in terms of strikeouts and free passes. Only allowed 6 hits in that time, 2 earned runs. Both of them came via, oh, no, wait, that's broken. Never mind. He has not given, I think he gave up 1 home run, but he has not given up 2. Jesus Broca, on the other hand, and Javik Blake had some really good info on him, which, by the way, I never mentioned it, but shout out to Javik Blake on being named Minor League Baseball's 2025 Future Star of the Year. He is awesome. Biloxi broadcasts have been hard to watch because of the camera angles the last couple of years, but you always want to tune in because Javik is fantastic at his job and really, really calls a very good game and absolutely well-deserved in terms of that award. But he had some good information on Broca today. He's been up to 94 on the fastball. In the fall league, he was up to 96 during the season. The slider so far has a 41% whiff rate and a 33% whiff rate on his changeup. Hitters have only put 3 balls in play off Broca's slider, and it's been his most often used pitch. And they've only made contact in play or foul on 22% of his total sliders out of the 59 he's thrown, and 7 of his 15 strikeouts have come on the slider. So there should be an article up at Brewer Fanatic on the Fall Stars. Broca is the other one. He's the third one along with O'Ray and Adam Shevsky. Very, very good start. His overall numbers are 9 innings pitched, 15 strikeouts to 5 walks, 2 earned runs for a 2 ERA flat. And finally, the last 2 pitchers here, Edwin Jimenez. He has solid numbers. I still don't know that I buy a ton of it, but he is coming off of Tommy John surgery, and Coleman Crowe showed that his stuff was a lot better the further he got removed from that last year. So I don't want to judge him too harshly. He's at 7 1/3 innings pitched. He struck out 5. He's only walked 3, but not much swing and miss in there right now. Only 2 earned runs, both via solo homers. 2.45 ERA. He, I would say, of all the numbers, him and Flores are a little more iffy in terms of the results they're getting versus the process they've had, but they both do show decent stuff, especially Flores. And Jimenez, again, coming off Tommy John surgery, it's just good to see him out there pitching and doing a solid job of getting good results overall. Finally, Nate Peterson is unfortunately like the one Brewer who's not performing very well in the AFL. He's gone 8 1/3 innings. He struck out 6, walked 7, given up 8 hits and 6 earned runs for a 6.48 ERA. He has limited the hard contact from what I've seen decently, so there's probably some bad luck, but he's also walked quite a few, like I said, and also not generating much swing and miss. So that kind of leads to potentially getting that bad luck, kind of like we talked about a lot this year with DL Hall. But that is all I have. So my voice is very close to going, so I need Jack to come back in.
This wasn't even that. This is not near like the longest shows we've done. I don't know how you're giving out already. And we had 2 weeks in between.
I was yelling at drivers on my way home today. I'm not going to lie.
See, this is also what I like about the off season. I'm not making the commute to Milwaukee every day, so less stress on the road for me as well. Although
Capital Drive is going to kill me, dude. I'm
thinking ahead. I'm thinking ahead to next year now with the 94 project. That is going to be a nightmare. Because yeah. I have to get into the ballpark. Like they're going to have at some point or another, like every single, not all at once, I don't think, but like at some point, every single way to get into the ballpark is going to be like closed down. So that's that's a future problem that I'm not going to try to think about. But now you made me think about it, so now my night is ruined. Hopefully your night is not ruined, or morning, or whenever you're listening to this. Thank you for tuning in to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. More off-season news coming. We will be back in a couple of weeks to break it down.